Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Coming up next on the Assembling Inclusion podcast.
So it's a lot more than just playing the game itself. It's really about the experiences that you can derive from the game, which is quite beautiful.
And so it became very clear that for our mission to come to life, peer counseling and engineering research needs to do what they need to do, but user research and professional development, we need to educate the game makers, educate the people that are creating the content so that they're including the closed captioning and the remapping and all of the things that everyone really needs to create gameplay that meets their preferences.
Today on the show, we're talking to Mark Barlet and Andy Wu from AbleGamers. AbleGamers is an organization with the mission of combating social isolation through play. Their goal is to give people with disabilities the same opportunities as everyone else by focusing on inclusive play and gaming. AbleGamers has 5 pillars, which you're going to hear about in our conversation today, including peer counseling, engineering research, community development, user research, and professional development. Mark and Andy are going to tell us all about the work that AbleGamers is doing, so let's dive right into our conversation. Hello, and welcome back to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. Today, we're featuring AbleGamers. I'm here today with founder Mark Barlet and Senior Director of Peer Counseling, Andy Wu. So Mark and Andy, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So just to start off, how would you describe the AbleGamers organization to our listeners?
AbleGamers' mission is to combat social isolation through play. In a nutshell, we really do know that people with disabilities are more likely to be socially isolated than the general population. And our mission is that a well-crafted video game and a decent internet connection gives people with disabilities an opportunity to have really meaningful social experiences through play. And so that's what we do.
So how did the organization actually get started? Was there a specific inspiration behind the mission of combating social isolation through gaming and play?
Well, I am a person with disabilities myself, but my disability doesn't really affect the way I approach gaming. I used gaming to stay connected with my best friends as we left middle school, high school, and off to start our lives. We used gaming to stay connected. One evening, I was planning on playing with my best friend, Stephanie, and she didn't log on. And she didn't log on because that afternoon, multiple sclerosis had decided that her mousing hand wasn't going to work anymore. And so it really became this race to find something to help make sure she could continue to play and we could continue to use gaming to stay connected. And I wasn't really finding anything. And so that really led to me feeling like if a disability was taking away this amazing avenue that I was using for socialization, that it might be affecting other people. And so that's kind of how AbleGamers was started.
So I noticed that one of your pillars on your website, because you have the 5 pillars really of the organization, is the peer counseling aspect. So can you speak to how that process typically works?
Yeah, so peer counseling, it's one of our founding activities of AbleGamers. And really it's players with disabilities and other professionals that we have that are team members that really first understand the barriers and challenges that our players experience. Largely that's the way of input, but it often includes accessibility settings within the games. And so our professionals and our peers who are players with disabilities really get to know the player, figure out where those challenges are, and figure out how we can address those challenges so that they can get back to gaming or game better or more comfortably.
Could you provide an example of how someone may have benefited from that peer counseling process in the past?
Just last month, we helped a player in Washington. He saw all of his roommates playing games. And he was like, why can I not play games, right? And so he had largely a difficulty holding controllers. And so what we did was we hopped on a video call, kind of understood, hey, what are your goals for gaming? What do you want to be able to do? What kind of games do you want to play? And what are some of the challenges? But not really to focus on the challenges per se, but we really looked at his movement abilities, how he is able to possibly hold a controller. And then from there, really devised a individual solution to figure out that gaming setup and what it could look like for him. And then so because of that, he could play with his roommates independently. So actually participate in that social activity. So it's a lot more than just playing the game itself. It's really about the experiences that you can derive from the game, which is quite beautiful. That was just last month. We kind of closed it out this month.
Well, that's really great that you were able to come up with a solution collaboratively to build that experience that way he had access to have that social interaction with his friends and have it be accessible for him. That's really great.
And we do this every day. This isn't just a one and done. Andy didn't say that that's a multi-week process and that there are 5 or 6 or 7 people who are working through peer counseling at any given time as we craft their solutions. So we get these wins all the time where we get to see someone really be able to lean in and use gaming as a way of having rich entertainment.
I really like that you had mentioned that it's a continuing process. It's not just one conversation and you're done. You really get to have a nice trial and error experience. Like, did this work? Did this not work? I assume. And then I could see how at the end, that's a really nice payoff to have something successfully work out for someone in that peer counseling experience. If there's not necessarily a solution, do you have another option that you give them? Like if you come across a barrier to the gaming, to a gaming system or a game in general, and you're not really sure how to provide someone with access to it, is there like an alternative?
I don't know if that we don't have a solution. I think it's being flexible and adaptable to think of what the best solution could be. There are a different number of routes that we could take, different consoles. So Xbox and versus a personal computer or a gaming setup. It depends. We could probably provide some input and steer individuals to different types of solutions and really set expectations with the people. It's like, you want to play this game, but perhaps that's not the best game for you for any particular reason. And because we have the information and we work together as a team to kind of figure that out, I think we've had large success in helping, I will say, almost every single player we've encountered, quite honestly. So
we've been doing this for 2 decades. So the reality is, when we started, a lot of this stuff didn't exist, but we've, been at the forefront not only of supporting people with disabilities, but inventing the technology that helps us do our job every day, like, the Microsoft Adaptive Controller, something we work with Microsoft on. We have an engineering research team that we give them problem statements, or they'll come in and they'll craft new solutions to help bridge that. And that just becomes another piece of a tool in our toolbox that we can then just apply to an individual, as Andy said, exactly what you need, because we probably invented it a decade ago or a month ago.
So that engineering research team, you use them almost to generate prototypes and ideas as new things kind of arise. What types of things have they created in the past? Since you've been around for so long, I'm assuming it's fairly extensive.
The Microsoft Adaptive Controller, the precursor to that was we worked with our engineering researchers and our friends at Evil Controllers, and we had created the Adroit Switchblade, which is kind of the father of the Microsoft Adaptive Controller, that allowed the same type of functionality, but we're going back into the Xbox 360 era. We just got finished working with an engineering team at the University of Prince Edward Island, Canada, who took a problem statement that I've been kicking around for probably a decade and said, here's my problem statement. And they came up with a really rich, meaningful solution that I think, once we've figured out how to regularize it, is going to give Andy and Andy's team, a really powerful piece of equipment that we can hand to people and enable them. So, the engineering research team is not just internal, but it's also working with our partners external, who want to lend their amazing engineering skills to solving the problems we bring to them.
That's a really nice collaboration to have both the internal team and the external partners really come together, because then I could see how that would translate out a little bit more, make it a little bit more accessible to have all those, minds working together. So Your program also has professional learning, right? For companies and for game designers. I think I had saw online, there's like a certified accessible player experience program. Can you speak to that program and what that kind of entails?
So, Andy's team over in peer counseling, the majority of the time they're supporting players whose disabilities manifest in some sort of physical way. But our mission is to support all people with disabilities. And so, in order to support people with auditory or visual or neurodiversity disabilities, a lot of the things that those groups need are found in the software. And so it became very clear that for our mission to come to life, peer counseling and engineering research needs to do what they need to do, but user research and professional development, we need to educate the game makers, educate the people that are creating the content so that they're including the closed captioning and the remapping and all of the things that everyone really needs to create gameplay that meets their preferences. We have academics that have worked with us, and through some of our own research, we created something called the Accessible Player Experience, which is a group of design patterns that are free on our website, accessible.games, that teach developers frames of mind so that they can make sure that the challenges they're putting in games don't become barriers. We created a certification program around it because as our mission grew and as our advocacy grew, game companies really started wanting to make sure people with disabilities were included. And there was an opportunity to create specialists, people who work in the industry creating games, who want to really deep dive into that accessibility. And they're embedded in major studios right now, creating really rich, accessible experiences, because we, as our organization, we need them doing that so that they can support all people with disabilities.
Can you provide an example of some of the companies or the games that have taken that training and immediately applied the information that you provided?
So it wouldn't be immediately applied because game making is a really long process. So
that's true.
Some games are still in development as long as the course has been out there. But, the game Last of Us 2 by the studio Naughty Dog, they talked about using the APX patterns as ways of helping them craft solutions. And that game is incredibly accessible. Major studios, EA, Square Enix Montreal, Blizzard, Activision, have all put their staff members into this training. And that knowledge is being used right now to make the games that will come out middle of this year, end of next year, games that we don't even know the titles are going to be much more accessible because of this work.
Oh, that's really great that they're able to kind of take that information and build it in as they're going along. So AbleGamers has obviously expanded greatly since you started a couple decades ago. What are your next step future plans? Like I know your site had mentioned that there's like a commitment to obviously staying involved in emerging technologies so that you can be on top of gaming trends and things like that. But what are some things that you're planning on for the near future?
Well, I'll say our immediate plans for the future is to really lean in and support our peer counseling. We, as an organization, spent the beginning of our lives really being an advocacy group because so much of the adaptations were needed in the gaming industry. We spent a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to convince game companies that people with disabilities were real and that we wanted to be consumers and that gaming was really important to the lives of people with disabilities. About 4 years ago, the game companies really no longer needed our advocacy. They had people internally that were advocating for accessibility. The studios started understanding the nature of accessibility. So we evolved and we've really been leaning into helping individuals, and Andy's team really helping individuals. Andy, take it from there, because I think that's when I look at our next 24 to 36 months, growing peer counseling is probably my number one priority.
Yeah, peer counseling, definitely being a founding activity of the organization, I think really now is really how to do it in a timely manner. There are a lot of people with disabilities that reach out to us every day. And as Mark said, this is not just a one and done kind of thing where it's like one per month. We're talking a lot of people in the United States and worldwide that are reaching out to us because they've heard, they've seen, they've been made aware because of this advocacy type movement that we've had for the early part of the organization. But now it really comes to doing, right? To really find the best approach, a reasonable approach, and a timely way to help people with disabilities play video games. Connecting what we know in the United States for right now is a good way to start. In the future, we could look elsewhere. And certainly we have branches elsewhere right now, but really growing that out so that we can help more people with disabilities get in the game is where I think we could have opportunities in the very near future anyway.
So if someone wanted to get more involved with the organization in terms of whether it's requesting to have peer counseling or get information in some other way to be more knowledgeable about how to make gaming accessible, how would you recommend them going about that?
Yeah, you can visit us at ablegamers.org. That's AbleGamers.org. If you're a developer and you want more information, our developer outreach site is accessible.games. What do you want to create? I want to create accessible games. There's the website. You can follow us on Twitter at AbleGamers, and the socials are the same across all of them. Keeping it simple.
Consistency is always good. Nice and easy. And your website was very accessible to get information off of, and it had a lot of information. So I'll make sure that all of that information is linked in the show notes. So everyone can easily just get right to that. And I guess my last question is just, and it's kind of a broad one, but how do you think that, or how do you know based on your experiences, that AbleGamers is making society more inclusive?
Video games are bigger than the NFL, the NBA, and movies combined. When you look at, and I don't even know, the last time I looked, it was like $130 billion a year in gaming. It is something from a cultural perspective that everyone is enjoying, be it on your smartphone, be it on a, tablet, whatever. Gaming is everywhere. Gaming is readily available, and it's important. It's important. Play is important. And so people with disabilities want to be included too. And people with disabilities are included now because of the work of AbleGamers. So, that's what I have to say about that. Play is important, and everyone's playing games.
It's definitely true. I'm thinking about the rise of the esports in the schools now and everything. I mean, obviously students were playing games long before that, but just the fact that it's now like a sanctioned school activity, obviously there's an incredible growth for gaming. But I just want to thank you both for coming on today to tell us about AbleGamers and to tell us about your mission and all of the different things that you offer. And I'm going to make sure to link all of that in our show notes so that everyone has access to it. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us on Twitter or Instagram, or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.